Thank you so much. I kind of felt like I represent the sort of average member of the church. I don't have professional credentials to speak of, but I do feel pretty strongly about caring for creation and being motivated specifically by my faith to do so. And I loved the question that I was sent to address, which is, how does faith and perspective inform your action on climate change? And thank you, Sam. I was really moved by the scriptures and what you have shared already. I wanted to share two quotes from Pope Francis because he's been influential in my life in terms of climate change and other environmental action. Living as protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. And inner peace is closely related to care for ecology. It's reflected in a balanced lifestyle together with a capacity for wonder. And I love that because I think for those of us who really intensely care about the environment, it can sometimes be challenging to have a balanced lifestyle because we see around us so much that needs to be done. And it can be so challenging that keeping this balance and having inner peace, but at the same time working to care for creation and having a capacity to wonder at the intricacies and beauty of what God has created for us. And then another influence in my life has been Sharon Eubank. And I would highly recommend, if you haven't already heard these two talks, she gave two fall forums for LDS Earth Stewardship in 2019 and 2020. In fact, it was at her request that she came back and spoke a second time. And she spoke in 2019 at length on the crisis that's facing the humanitarian crisis across the globe of so many refugees having been, in many cases, forced to flee their homes because of extreme weather patterns that are already impacting such huge populations of the globe. And I was moved when she said, people are forced to move, and in transit, they are suffering violence and death in ways that make it hard for me to sleep at night. Okay. And she goes into quite a bit of detail about various parts of the world and the way they're being impacted by salt incursion, for example, forcing people off of farms and many other things. But she closes or includes this comment: the opportunity is right for us to take a cause we care about and do something helpful we haven't done before. So I would encourage those of us who are listening, even if we're already engaged, to think, is there one more thing that I can do? In 2015, the Pope wrote this letter to the world, every person on the planet. And if you haven't read it, I'd encourage you to read it. It's actually, though it's referred to as a letter, it's really more like a book, a small book. So out of concern that people were not reading this document because of its length, I, with a complete lack of humility, went in and edited it down to a much shorter document and added illustrations and put it on our website, eartheast.org. And it's interesting, we get several thousand people a year looking specifically at that part of our website. And I hope that you will be motivated by it the way I was. It changed my life. And I was so happy because I actually got to see him in person when he was here in Washington. So he asks us to become painfully aware of what's happening around us in the world and discover what each of us can do. And the more you learn about climate change and its impacts, they're so pervasive at every level of life. And then think about what we can do. So the photos in the background here are just one example. Our streams are under continual pressure by development and other things. And this is an example of 3 acres of woods where I spent a good part of my summer trying to fight to preserve these woods. A beautiful, ecologically complex area with trees, many of them between 125. The oldest that I did a count on was 220 years old. And the people who were pushing this project were saying in 2 or 3 years, you'll have no idea that these were cut down. It'll just grow back and be green and no animals will be harmed. I mean, it was very disheartening to experience. Even if we brought in, this is the gentleman and woman there are part of the WGALA TV crew that came in. We got TV coverage. And we still lost the vote. We got 2 to vote in favor of blocking it, 3 voted for the project, and so the city council approved it. Weekend, this is what it starts to look like. Breaks my heart, actually. Okay, so it's painful, but because of the gospel perspective, we know God is in control. We have to do just what we can do, right? And then as was mentioned at the very beginning of this day-long seminar, is that it's not that we turn it over to God and don't expect to do anything ourselves. We do what we can, but God is there and will be in control and is the creator of this earth. But we do what we can. So for example, here we brought in volunteers, and we couldn't do anything about the big plants that were going to be destroyed, but we dug up what we could and spent weeks moving plants into other parts of the watershed so that at least the smaller plants could survive. One thing I've done that I would suggest you might try doing in your own community, trees are great for creating habitat, holding and cleaning stormwater, and also, as you know, carbon sequestration, really important. So I've been able to give away 2,650 trees over the past 7 years since hearing that talk, or the reading the letter from the Pope. And it's enough to start making an impact in our community, a little community. So you may be able to do something similar where you live. On our 2 acres that I've transitioned into, most of it into native plants, it's really making a big difference. But that alone is relatively small, a thimbleful in an ocean. But by teaching others about the process and in giving them encouragement and information, it can make a difference. So I've given about 150 talks to community groups, including I did one last night to a community group of 500. And it can make a difference. So I would estimate that at least 3,000 people have now learned more about native plants, their benefits, and are changing the way they approach the care of their own properties. I contacted, after being motivated by the Pope, as well as, I shouldn't say that my Latter-day Saint roots didn't have a place. They did. I was already an active master gardener and things, but just encountering that document from the Pope really did sort of change the level of time and energy that I put into environmental work. So I contacted LDS Earth Stewardship, of which I was already a member, and said, the Earth's a bigger place than Utah, because I only saw events happening in Utah at that point. And we worked together, and I was able to launch the first local group for LDS Earth Stewardship. We cover Maryland, DC, and Virginia. We have about 100 members and have held about 100 events. We've been able to do really good things to benefit creation in our little neck of the woods, including invasive plant removal, trash pickups, getting the church video to be part of the National Cathedral Earth Day. Those are just a few examples. But what has pleased me the most, I think may have been the most impactful thing, is we were able to get a grant to on this historic African-American site purchased by freed slaves right after the Civil War, an area that now is just sort of weedy, when we started, weedy grass. And it faces a very busy highway. We now have planted 35 native trees around the perimeter, which over time will completely change the appearance of this property, as well as provide habitat, hold water in place, and sequester carbon, reducing the temperature in the area. But we also have 4 large native plant beds that model for people what they could do in their own home properties. And I wanted to encourage people to get more involved in whatever nonprofits are working in your area to do earth stewardship, to actually, get dirty, making a difference. And then if you don't already have an LDS Earth Stewardship group where you live, we've streamlined the process to create new groups. It only takes 5 interested people willing to start a group. And I'm happy to talk with anyone after this meeting, because as was mentioned, I'm on the board of LDS Earth Stewardship and specifically work with our growing of local groups. We now have a group in Southern California, Georgia. Funny thing, the groups in Salt Lake and Provo are having a hard time getting going. So if you live in those areas, please contact LDS Earth Stewardship and become involved. New York. Ghana is trying to get a group started. We have a little group in Uganda, a group in Germany, and Rolf, I think, is one of the participants who's the leader of that German group. Okay, so for our little group in the East, our website is Earth East. Please visit and see what we've done, and I hope it might inspire you to do a group where you live. One of the benefits is, as was mentioned, I've had a calling for many years of doing interfaith outreach at a multi-stake level for our area. And people of faith, regardless of their faith, are motivated, sincerely motivated to make a difference on climate change. So I'm part of the Montgomery County Interfaith Climate Change Group, and I learned so much from what they're doing. We are doing nothing really in comparison to what they're doing. And then I was invited at to participate at a synagogue service in honor of trees because of the work I've done with trees in our area. And they asked me, could your congregation's green team please join with our green team in doing some community work and getting trees planted and so on. And I said, well, I'd love to do that if we had a green team. Most of our congregations don't have green teams, I was sorry to report. But I went to my bishop and asked, could we have one? And he said, sure, no problem. And so we now have a green team. We've been able to do a joint project with this local synagogue and look forward to doing. In fact, I got an email this week from them saying, okay, what's our next thing that we could do together? Martin Luther King, let's do a project together. So joining with others of faith. And then I wanted to share specifically one of the members of our group, Joel Richardson. He's using the book Drawdown, which if you're not familiar with, I'd recommend it as reading, because it provides about 100 very specific ways that we can make a difference in climate change. And he's using this book to basically guide a lot of what he does. And he has, for example, solar panels, a wind turbine, composting toilets. He's done a major stream restoration project on 50 acres, planted about 1,000 native trees, put 19 acres into native perennials. That's the photo in the upper left. Has a very large vegetable garden to feed the community, composting. And when I say large, I mean very large. And shall I say, a bishop for our church worked when our temple was open, was a temple worker, so active, having this, as the Pope mentioned in our early quote, was to have this well-balanced life. He has a well-balanced life, but he's really making a difference in terms of climate change. And most recently, he was appalled a few years ago when he saw the volume of trash coming out of the schools at the end of the lunch hour. Tons and tons going to incinerators or landfill. So in 14 Frederick County schools, he has created programs where the students are taught how to measure the waste at the end of every lunch day. Most of it does not go to the waste stream. It's sorted out, recycled. Food that is good, like unopened milk jugs, apples, and so on, are given to the local food shelters or food banks. And the mass of the food, the excess food, is composted. So it's really only like meat and items like that that end up going into the trash. So literally thousands of tons of trash are no longer going into the waste stream. And that is enough to start having an impact on climate change, because it's gone now from 14 schools. He's got programs starting this year in 8 Montgomery County schools. He's presented to the state legislature about having this program go statewide. Think about the impact that could have if statewide every school sorted through, recycled, and composted the majority of its waste. So I'd say if you live in an area where the schools are not doing something like this, you might learn about what Joe is doing and consider trying to get it started where you live, because it's a very practical, hands-on way to impact in your community something that has an influence on climate change. And then finally, I was hoping that people would think about whatever it is that you're currently doing, ways that you might even more be able to change your lifestyle and consumption to combat global warming. So in our family, here's a couple of things we're doing. A couple of years ago, we gave up our second car. So now we have just one hybrid, we share it. Occasionally I have to set up an Uber, but most of the time we're able to negotiate that. So we buy only what's needed. almost all the furniture in our home, maybe a couple of items were purchased firsthand, but otherwise it's all recycled secondhand items or things people have given us. We can wear our clothes sometimes for decades. Craig knows me from back in the 1980s. Craig, I probably still have some of the clothes you might have seen me wearing to church. We grow a lot of our food in a vegetable garden. We try to reduce the meat we eat. I'd say we have a great talk at LDS Earth Stewardship on the word of wisdom and climate change and the relationship of the two and our personal choices in what we choose to consume as we eat. It was a talk given by Ellen White and is available on YouTube on our website. We get our electricity from wind, solar. We did it the easy way, just by signing up with an alternate provider rather than the regular provider. We compost. We donate a fair amount of time and money to our creation care. So I find one of the things I love with being a member of LDS Earth Stewardship and connecting with other people of my faith is sharing ideas about ways to live more sustainably on the earth. And this is a quote from the Pope: "A person who can afford to consume more but regularly uses less protects the environment." There's nobility in such actions. And in our church callings, whatever they are, and in our families, we can try to model and teach gratitude for creation, respect for life, and care for local ecosystems. I was, for a number of years, our nursery leader, and I loved that calling. And one of the fun things was, in the manual, there's one lesson on God creating the beautiful earth for us. Well, for us, it took several months of Sundays to get through creation, but we had such a great time. And the kids actually learned quite a bit that they've carried with them. I hear from parents years now along where they're 8 or 9-year-olds, and they know things about caring for the earth that I think the seeds were planted in that early period. And I'll close with this quote from President Nelson: "As beneficiaries of the divine creation, what shall we do? We should care for the earth, be wise stewards over it, and preserve it for future generations." And I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you very much.